What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review episode 2 of True Detective Night Country, where all spoilers are fair game. However, there's not that much to talk about this week. I felt like the episode opened in really strong fashion and it ended in relatively strong fashion, but for an episode that was over an hour long, there was not that much that really there weren't that many major revelations or plot details, just a lot of little details and clues and nuance, and it is a show called True Detective, so naturally we're going to see people doing detective work. However, because this show is very different from the True Detective seasons that came before, the first 3 seasons were very much grounded in reality. I mean, season 1 had a hint of a little whisper of the supernatural. But in that, True Detective Season 4 is going all in on the undead and monsters, and who knows what else this season might have in store for us. I feel like once you lean into the supernatural and lean into the horror genre, well then you got to deliver every single fucking episode, because HBO shows, like their Sunday night shows, they're water cooler shows. They're the kind of shows where you stumble into work on Monday morning, you might be a little late, you might be a little hungover, might be a little sleep deprived, and you hang out by the water cooler and say, hey, did you see the latest episode of House of the Dragon? Or did you see the latest episode of The White Lotus or Succession? Like, holy shit, that was fucking amazing. I don't think anybody's going to be saying that tomorrow morning, apart from just the shock and horror of watching that guy screaming before the title sequence as his arm snapped off. It was like something straight out of John Carpenter's The Thing, one of the major influences on this show, where you have like these 6 bodies that all look like one big giant organism. But that one guy, he's still alive and is a medically induced coma, but we'll have to wait until the following episode before Jodie Foster, a.k.a. Detective Liz Danvers, gets a chance to talk to him. But the good news is, even though there's not that much to discuss from this episode, thankfully, Paul Schrader, filmmaking icon from the 1970s and 80s, who wrote Taxi Driver, decided to chime in about this show last week. And just in case you missed it, if you're not online as much as I am, I just want to read this post that he made about the show, which apparently he wrote under the influence of Ambien as he was falling asleep. But here is the post in full. True Detective Night Country. True idiosyncratic film geniuses seem simplistic of the surface, yet impossible to emulate. Bresson, Tarkovsky, Rene, Antonioni, Brakhage could issue color-by-number director film guides, yet defy anyone to complete the recipes. Witness vendors Tokyo Gaga, which takes time making a David lunch. David is generous. I've been influenced by him, but to emulate him, that's like climbing the sheer slur 9 poops of Mr. I mean, that's like something that you would read in an H.P. Lovecraft short story where somebody's like leaving a journal and like, oh my God, I'm going insane. And speaking of Lovecraft, I'm amazed that nobody's mentioned Lovecraft in connection with this show, because his story, At the Mountains of Madness, at least just because it's Arctic and deals with the supernatural, at least has some common ground. But obviously, At the Mountains of Madness deals with aliens. We don't quite know yet what this story is dealing with, but I suspect it's something very old, like pre-Ice Age. But for all you youngins out there who can't appreciate this unique sample of film criticism, there was a time where Paul Schrader, before he was a filmmaker, was actually a really good film critic and film historian. He wrote a book called Transcendentalism in Film, which is all about Yasuhiro Ozu, Robert Bresson, and Carl Theodor Dreyer. I mean, it is academic, niche, film nerd, just insanity. But if you like those classic filmmakers, by all means, hunt it down. But I just love how even when he's falling asleep on drugs, he's talking about some of the best classic filmmakers of the 20th century. Robert Bresson, Andrei Tarkovsky, Alain Resnais, Michelangelo Antonioni, and Stan Brakhage. If you like very experimental, very highbrow cinema, classic cinema from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which is the era in which his aesthetic was formed, definitely hunt those movies down. And Paul Schrader is one of those rare film critics where he very successfully made the jump to filmmaker. I mean, just his first couple of movies, his first 4 out of the gate as a director, we had Blue Collar, we had Hardcore, American Gigolo, a personal favorite of mine, as well as Cat People. All 4 of those movies are profane and transgressive and erotic and controversial and feature some dynamite acting. And he made a lot of good movies later on. Like if you like True Detective Night Country and like to see stories set in the kind of a wintry wasteland, his movie Affliction won James Coburn an Oscar, and Nick Nolte probably should have won an Oscar as well. And at any rate, I'm officially wasting time and talking about Paul Schrader because there just wasn't that much to talk about from this particular episode. I mean, we got to see Christopher Eccleston as Ted Cassaro reconnecting with Jodie Foster's character, and initially he comes in and just says, look, like you don't want this case. It's shit soup or whatever, shit sandwich, whatever expression she likes to use for a case that absolutely sucks. But as it turns out, they've got history. They've been boning off and on for 19 years, even when they were involved with other people. And it was just hilarious seeing them in this scene where Jodie Foster is screaming at him, saying like, don't you dare, and I'm sure whether male, female, whatever, like everybody can relate to that moment where somebody's about to go over the cliff and the other person is not quite there, and they're like, hold on, wait up, let's do this at the same time. So I thought that scene was absolutely hilarious. And obviously, due to the extreme isolation of this town of Ennis, people seem to have a couple different fuck buddies in rotation, and it reminds me of the infinite wisdom that was shared to me by a friend of mine in Palatka, Florida. Once Palatka, Florida is a very small town, and he was describing how relationships never quite end. He said, like, you never lose like a lover, you just lose your place in line. Like, there might be a husband or a boyfriend or whatever in front of you, but if those people go out of town, well, then your place in line has just improved. And anyway, it seems like a very similar phenomenon is going on in Ennis, where it's cold, it's lonely, and so all people have to do with their time is get in fights and bang, and more power to them. Life is short, bang whoever you want as often as humanly possible. And speaking of which, Liz Danvers visits yet another one of her boyfriends who is teaching in a class. She dismisses all of his students, and she starts basically picking his brain about the Tsalal station and what they do, and how it's a very odd crew with no rotation. Usually those isolated crews, like, you know, people will work for a couple of months and then they get cycled out. Other people come in and take over for a while. These guys were total maniacs, very fanatical in their devotion to their craft, and apart from playing a few video games on the side, they didn't really have any lives outside of their work. However, we do start to learn a few details about the character Clark over the course of the episode. We learn that Clark was very much involved with the character Annie, the dead woman that's been getting investigated by Navarro for many, many years, and that they both had that crazy spiral symbol, and no one quite knows what the origin of that is, but he had it over his chest. I think Annie had it on her back. And then when Navarro and Danvers finally investigate this kind of secret trailer that Clark had on the side, the whole place is filled with all these just insane drawings and all these, like, you know, all this crazy text and gibberish, but also a big ass symbol, that big, I don't mean, if we want to call it an infinity symbol or a spiral, whatever you want to call it. But somehow this is all connected to the research of stopping cellular decay, which seemed to be the main focus of Tsalal Station, where whether it's the curing of cancer, whatever the case might be, but they are trying to prevent cellular decay. But goddamn, it sounds like things got really, really weird out there with like Clark running around naked and just like spouting out gibberish. And Clark's body is conspicuously absent from this kind of giant pile of frozen dead bodies. And no matter how they died either in terror or in an agonizing pain, where like they talk about how sometimes if you're suffering from hypothermia, it can cloud your thinking, and so you start to feel hot even though you're freezing and start ripping your clothes off. But it appears as if most of these guys fled from the station in various states of undress, and then somebody else neatly tucked away all their clothes. Perhaps that was Clark. Who knows what might have motivated him to do that, but what's interesting is how this whole town seems to accept the idea of the undead being a pretty regular thing this time of year. And I don't know if the show is completely selling me on the idea that in a town that otherwise is very much mired in and concerned with the modern world, that everybody's just cool with the idea of seeing dead people from time to time. But as Rose tells Navarro at one point, you got to keep in mind the difference between mental illness or the spiritual world. But when it comes to the spiritual world, the dead can come to you for three reasons. Either they miss you, or they need to tell you something that you need to know, or they've come to take you with them. And it seems like Rose very much has her head kind of like screwed on in very solid fashion on her body, because she can tell the difference between mental illness in the spirit world. But yeah, her ex-husband or dead husband, Travis, when he was dying of leukemia, he brought by, I think, donuts or bagels? He brought by some pastries of some kind to have one farewell screw before he walked off into the ice rather than dying of leukemia. But as far as the actual investigation itself is going, I like the character of Peter, and I find it interesting how he's not distracted by all these self-inflicted bite wounds and like clawed eyes and ruptured ears and that sort of thing. These bodies are just an absolute catastrophe of just horrific details, but he's resourceful enough to remember, oh shit, well, this face is still relatively intact, uses it to unlock a phone. And within that phone, they find that really alarming video where somebody's just hanging out the station doing their thing. When they see somebody behind them over his shoulder, somebody convulsing, they get real still. And right when they get real still, that's when the lights go out. And so I imagine we'll be kind of discovering or encountering more footage as we go. But I wish I could say I like this episode as much as I like the first one. As I mentioned in my previous review, I'm on the hook. I'm going to watch this entire show. But if the show is going to be more of this as opposed to more of what we saw in episode 1, I could definitely feel my passion and enthusiasm starting to wane a bit. It's not a bad show by any stretch of the imagination. It's a very solid show. But when you attach the name True Detective to a show, then people expect greatness. And speaking of which, that is loosely connected to another little minor controversy related to the show last week, where the writer-director Issa Lopez, she got into a little dust-up online. I don't know. I don't want to get too into the weeds on this, but essentially accusing people of review bombing the show for liking True Detective too much. And I feel like, I could see her point. She wants people to offer positive reviews of her show. But if you're going to call your show True Detective Night Country instead of just Night Country, well, then you're going to get all the fanatical fans of season 1, because season 1, 10 years ago, one of the best shows of the last decade. And if you're going to make a show that's season 4 of one of the best shows ever, well, then you have to accept the good with the bad, because you get the brand name recognition of True Detective. Like, oh shit, what's that? I'm going to check it out. But they have very strong opinions. And it's like, if you don't want the strong opinions of diehard fans of season 1, just call the show Night Country and call it a day. But if you're wondering what I'm talking about when it comes to the controversy, Issa Lopez initially wrote and then deleted this post. So if you liked last night's episode of True Detective Night Country and have a Rotten Tomatoes account, maybe head over there and leave an audience review. The bros and hardcore fanboys of season 1 have made it a mission to drag the rating down, and it's kind of sad considering all the 5-star ones. And I think she very quickly realized it was a mistake to write that, because then she wrote, okay, I removed a post. I despise review bombing of any kind, but A, our audience score in RT is much better now, and B, I used a generalization about who was bombing, and generalizations are always a mistake. And so many beautiful bros and True Detective Season 1 hardcore fans loved our Ep1. That's the initial post that she should have gone out with, because if you immediately jump to the conclusion that only bros and assholes are the ones that are quote-unquote review bombing your show, like if your reviews were at like 5%, then I would understand. Like that sounds like review bombing. But the reviews were like at 67 or 70% for an audience score. And I feel like that's actually not bad given how much people love season 1. And I feel like people overuse the word review bombing or the expression review bombing the same way people overuse the word woke, where it means like whatever you want depending upon what point you're trying to make. Review bombing implies that a lot of people with malice and malicious intent are dogpiling a show or movie they haven't even seen because they don't like what it represents. Whereas if you watch something and don't like it, that's not review bombing. That's just leaving a negative review. But anyway, I'm getting off track on this as well, because there's just not that much to talk about with the episode. And so it's easier to talk about the things surrounding the show as opposed to the show itself. But I guess this is all just a very long-winded way of saying that I like the show. I'm rooting hard for the show. I really want it to deliver. I want it to be as strong as season 3, hopefully maybe somewhere closer to season 1. But maybe it won't get there. And if people don't like it, that's not a review bomb. That's just people not responding to the show. But if it can get back to where it was in episode 1, I think the show will end in very strong fashion. But yeah, right now, I feel like the slow burn is threatening of turning into like dying embers. And we're going to need some shock and awe and some real horror next week in order to put this show back in good standing. And from what I read over at Variety, it appears as if initially, at least, the show is a modest success, or a pretty good success for HBO, because it got about 2 million viewers on Sunday night. And if you compare that to some of their other shows, like The White Lotus, season 2 of White Lotus, that premiered to 1.5 million views. Season 2 of Euphoria delivered 2.4 million views. So if you're falling somewhere between White Lotus and Euphoria, two very popular shows, then great. And it's one of those things where if this show can sustain 2 million viewers, well, then I imagine we'll be seeing an announcement for Season 5 in the not-so-distant future. Although I will need to see the final tally of the Season 4 premiere, because while White Lotus and Euphoria might have come out between like 1.5 and 2.4 million, ultimately, over time across multiple platforms, they eventually legged it out to about 15.5 million for White Lotus and 19.5 million for Euphoria, so those are some serious numbers. In any case, I'm rapidly running out of things to say, so I'll be back on Tuesday for a little Oscar nomination breakdown video on this channel, but I hope you enjoyed this video and all my zigzagging and careening around from topic to topic, just trying to find a way to justify making a video at all. So I appreciate you sticking with me. Hope everybody's enjoying the show, or hope everybody's enjoying the show more than I am, because I've gone from being like all in favor of it to, my enthusiasm has softened just a little bit, but I'll still be back next Sunday, hoping and praying and keeping my fingers crossed for the best possible show that we can, that HBO can deliver. But hope everybody has a great week. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. Thanks again for watching, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.